Welcome back to the Page Break podcast with Rich and Brian. We're excited to have author Mark Hughes with us today. He's one of our Genesis authors, and I think it's safe to say this is a unique book. Brian and I have been publishing books for about 16 years. We've worked on a combined total of around 6,000 projects, and I can honestly say I haven't worked on anything that is in this same vein. So I think this is going to be a really fun podcast. We're very excited to have him on. And so we'll give him, 15, 30 seconds, however, to introduce himself here in the book. And then we're just going to jump right into some questions. Mark, you can take it away.
I'm Mark Hughes. I'm a retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, served from 1976 to 1996. And then when I retired, I got my master's in communication. Then I got a job at the ammunition plant in McAllister, Oklahoma, called McAllister Army Ammunition Plant, as their public information specialist and also their historian. And the historian part is what generated the book.
Excellent. Yeah, that gives us a good idea of the jumping off point. So talk to us a little bit about the book. Just give us the 30,000 foot view, the title, and kind of what the content is like.
Its title is We Make the Part That Goes Boom, BOOM. A history of America's premier bomb loading facility, McAllister Army Ammunition Plant. And the title came from Make the Part That Goes Boom after the media found out that one of our 500-pound bombs killed an ISIS leader. They swarmed the ammunition plant, wanting to tour it and write stories on it. And they kept on getting confused. They thought that we made the actual casings to the bomb, when actuality was transported to us from a third-party contractor. And all we do is put the explosives inside the bomb. So to make things clear to the media, the commander at that time, Colonel Hewitt, just said, we make the part that goes boom. And that quite simply explained everything to the media they needed to know. So therefore, the purpose of the title there.
Awesome. Yeah. When I first saw that and then saw your cover, I immediately knew that it was going to be intriguing, to a lot of people. Yeah, it's thanks for that explanation, because I didn't know that up until now.
It starts in around 1943 and gives the history of the McAllister area. Well, everybody was digging out of the 1929 Depression. The McAllister people had tried everything they could to make money, and then they heard about a shell loading plant. So they started digging around, and they finally found the property that the Navy was looking for. It had good railways, it had good transportation lines, rolling hills, so everything the Navy wanted. And by intrigue, they got the Navy down there, and they kept them away from the competition, other cities who were looking to do the same thing, and that was to entice the Navy to build. They got the $75 million contract. And so they built it in 9 months. So that was absolutely amazing, especially when considering that for one whole month it rained and had 13 inches of rain and completely stopped the building. They couldn't do anything. I mean, railroads were flooded, roads were flooded. They had to use dredging machine to dredge water out of the ammunition area they were building igloos on for storage plants and buildings. So it was amazing what they did with the 1940s type of equipment they had way back then.
Right. Was that the same year as the Bixby, Oklahoma flood?
I did not research that one, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to look that. So I live, just so our listeners know, I live about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of the place that Mark is talking about. And our town sits kind of in a little valley right outside the Arkansas River. So anytime we get in, luckily we live in Oklahoma, it doesn't rain a lot, but anytime we get a lot of rain, Bixby floods. But I remember in the 40s, there was a kind of a devastating flood that leveled a bunch of things. So I bet it was the same time.
So
yes,
a question. Sorry, Rich.
Very good.
So you said you retired in 96, as far as you know, from the Marines. Around what time did you decide this story was something that you wanted to write?
Well, I took early retirement from the plant in 2012, then worked for the local newspaper for 3 years, then retired for good. And I made a copy of his Captain Woodside's 30-page historical document. Captain Woodside was the commanding officer of the ammunition plant from the time it was built through the end of the war. Then by age, he had to retire from the Navy. He was forced to retire. He documented everything from pre-construction through the Korean War. And what I found in his historical document was a historian's dream. It was basically the backbone for the book. Without the book, this could not have been written. I can tell you that right now. I have to give all credit to Captain Woodside for preserving the history of the ammunition plant.
Awesome. And this is a little bit different because you not only put this book together, but you were a writer by trade for a while.
Yes, from high school on.
So because of your background, how did that influence the storytelling in this book? Was it something completely removed from what you, or were there stuff you could bring in from what you'd already done?
I don't know if there's stuff that I could bring in, but I could understand the history of it and writing the flow of the information I gathered from Captain Woodside and also from newspapers.com. That was another wealth of information in which I could go to McAllister newspapers back in the 1940s and research a whole bunch of stuff. And without that site, the book would really be empty of a lot of information that is absolutely amazing and made the book what I hope and think it will be. But being a historian or an emerging historian and a history buff and a writer, it sort of came easy to me to see what needed to be written and how to write it. I would basically gather my information, try to put similar things together in a pile, go through it, and then write everything in that pile, do my footnotes, and then not give a title to the chapter after the entire chapter was written so I can know the totality of what was being said in that chapter.
Okay. What kind of a with you being in the military for basically your main career, what do you think is different now in 2025 versus when you were in the Marines during your time? Is that something you've ever contemplated on and just thought about the difference now versus then?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily isolate it to just the Marines. I would say to the country. So let me give you some examples from the book of what I'm talking about. During World War II, people worked at the plant. They had two reasons to work there: defending their nation. They also had several relatives in the military serving overseas. For example, Mrs. Cornelia Powell of Allen, Oklahoma, had 25 nephews and one niece in the service, with 15 of those nephews serving overseas. On the swing shift in one building alone, there were 15 Blue Star parents with 30 relatives participating in the war. One woman not only had a son in the Army and one in the Navy, but had 10 nephews. One father had 4 sons in the Army. And I give more examples in the book. So this war was personal to those who worked at the Naval Depot, and the work they did was even more personal, which was loading explosives into bombs, torpedoes, submarines, rockets, just about anything that could be dropped from a plane or shot from artillery or a tank was loaded at the ammunition plant. And talking about torpedoes, that was one of the things that caused the largest amount of deaths at the ammunition plant in 1944 in December. About 10 minutes before the shift was over, they were handling about 8 torpedoes using a forklift. The investigation never could figure out what caused the explosion, but there were about 11 people involved in moving these torpedoes. They went off for whatever reason. They found the tins of the forklift 2 miles away, and one column carried all the body parts of the bodies. And there's a memorial site back in the woods now to all these 11 people who died with their names engraved on the memorial site. There's been other accidents and deaths, but nothing as big and volatile as that one. You may remember the accident in Shakota, in which a lady driving her car, in 1970s, came up a one-way street, collided with an 18-wheeler carrying bombs, and some of the bombs went off. And the explosions from those bombs were heard in Muskogee, about 30, 40 miles away. You got to be, safety is a big thing at the ammunition plant. But sometimes there's humans are involved in it, and you still got mistakes, so.
Yeah, I actually worked at an Enterprise Rent-A-Car in the late 1900s, 1999, somewhere around there, I think. And we rented cars to people at Crane Naval Base in southern Indiana. And one of the guys that came in, he was somebody who worked in the department with bombs, and his shirt just said like something like, "If you can read this and I'm running, you should follow me." Like, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was very funny. Like he wore that to work a lot of times because he's like, "I'm literally in the room where things could explode."
If
Some sort of
I think
specialist.
I saw a similar T-shirt that says, "If you see me running, go the other way." Yeah,
Yeah. So that
mostly ordnance disposal guys. But let me also, you talked about today and back in the 1940s. So today we complain because we have to wait 30 minutes in traffic getting to work, and we have our luxury cars, self-driving, air conditioning, GPS, everything else. But here's what people did to get a great paying job at $1.50 a day, mind you. And it was called a king's ransom, getting paid $1.50 a day. And if you had a technical skill, you got paid even more. Let's see here. One woman rode a mule 4 miles each day to connect with transportation that carried her another 12 miles to the depot. A man rode horseback 8 miles before boarding a bus for an additional 40-mile commute. Some commuted even longer distances. One employee was from Durant, made a 140-mile round trip, and another drove 120 miles daily, leaving home at 4 a.m. and returning at 7 p.m. Others traveled 54 miles and 66 miles to get to work. So, there are probably two reasons why they did that: the king's ransom and the fact that they didn't like the fact that our nation was attacked and we were at war. And they have a patriotic purpose in coming to work. But when they were coming to work, they had a big problem with getting these farmers, pig sloppers, ranch hands, day laborers to not leave the plant and go back to their farm and do their thing. They're so used to being independent. They say, well, it's time to harvest the crop. I'm going to leave my position on the work production line. I'm going to be gone for a couple of months and harvest the crops. So they would just leave, and then they'd come back and reposition or reassume their position on the production line. So there was a big problem with absenteeism. So Captain Woodall finally took charge of it, saying, "You leave without permission, you ain't coming back. You don't have a job." So that sort of solved the problem there. But they went from independence, not knowing necessarily how much money they're going to making, to a regular job, to learning how to work, develop a skill, to building camaraderie. So the depot really brought a different lifestyle, an improved lifestyle to southeastern Oklahoma.
that is really cool. That was actually part of my next question, and I think you've answered it a little bit, but I want to ask it anyway because I think you can expound a little bit. So when somebody reads this book with all these stories that you're and many more that are inside, what do you want people to take, like what truths do you want people to take away from this? How do you want somebody to feel after they've read it?
Well, that it took all kinds of people to win World War II. In the book, I use the word rednecks, but I use it in a reverent manner. From the book, I say, here the word is not an insult, but honor, a tribute to the grit, skill, and steadfast patriotism of those who labored under pressure and in dangerous conditions to ensure every American service member had the munitions they needed. Their work was indispensable, their contributions immeasurable, and their story long overdue. They would be laughed at today. Tobacco spitting, wearing a torn, worn out straw hat, patched up coveralls, and shoes or boots, more than likely with holes in them, would be their probable attire. Some of their floors in their houses were dirt. Some had never been to a picture show, and children ran around shoeless, and some, no doubt, shirtless. And the Sears catalog wasn't used to order merchandise as it stayed in the outhouse. So these people, again, went from poverty to a functional living life. But I tell you what, when the depot opened up and thousands of people came to an area in which there was not enough housing for everybody, they were living in tents, cars, buses, pup tents tied to trees. In fact, the county health officer said that he was surprised that with all the open latrines and open wells, that there wasn't any type of a typhoid epidemic going through that area. So there was a constant need for housing, and it never really was resolved during the entire war time frame. Because
Wow.
the McAllister Chamber of Commerce supported everybody coming in, but they didn't want everybody, a big house building project coming to McAllister, because they said after the war is over, what's going to happen to all those houses? We'll have a glut of housing, and housing prices will fall, and we won't be
Yeah.
looking pretty good here. And then, of course, when the war ended, the same thing happened. We had all these veterans from this local area coming back to McAllister and all the small towns around it, and they're looking for a house. They didn't have any. So once again, the federal government had to have federalized apartments, and they still didn't have enough. And my book talks about that too.
Yeah. That's just a totally different time, obviously. Let's kind of dig into your writing process. How did you feel as you were going, starting the book and going through it? I know you mentioned you had a lot of material to kind of bounce off of to help put the book together, but did you have some sort of a schedule where I'm going to try to get so many pages or chapters or anything like that done at a certain
No,
time?
unfortunately, I had an alternate life, being married, 2 dogs, going to the doctor's appointments, everything else. So I wasn't able to say, I'm going to sit down for the next week and just dedicate 8 hours a day to this. At times, I just had to say, okay, no interruptions. I'm closing the door. In fact, I went to the library several times just so I get peace and quiet and write my stories and everything else. But let me talk a little bit about the writing process, not necessarily the process, but what maybe future writers could use some tips on type thing. Be systematic and organized. Sometimes if you look at my desk now, you can see that I'm not organized. And every couple of weeks, I get so frustrated, I just stop for a couple of hours and clean everything up. But you have to be systematic and organized in what you do. So my suggestion is, especially when it comes to footnotes, find an app or use the old-fashioned 3x5 cards to write your footnotes on. And then when you have your page numbered, write the page number on the footnote card so you can immediately know what page that footnote is associated with. And then secondly, choose your publisher very carefully. Genesis Publishing Services have been great. I wrote 2 children's stories with another publishing company. I will not mention their name, but I had a terrible experience with them. I would make corrections and they wouldn't get it right and everything else. It was very, very frustrating. So another thing is make sure you put the document you're working on a thumb drive or a hard drive. I thought I had lost it in my computer, and you had never seen a Marine almost come to tears and so panicky about finding that. I finally found it. So that convinced me to buy a external hard drive and back it up to that. Because that's the last thing you want to do is spend 10 years writing something and then finding out that, it's no longer on the drive you thought it was or whatever type of stuff. So
Yeah, those are excellent pieces of advice. One of the things I ask every author, because I have never written a book, I've been published in some periodicals, writing some theology stuff, and writer's block to me it could be a real thing because it was not something I did all the time. I would write an article and then I might not write again for 3 years. And so I would have a great idea and then I would hit this creative roadblock. Do you ever experience that? And if you do, what's your advice on getting past those?
Well, I think that's something that I don't think I can't say historians, emerging historian, and this is the first book I've written for history, would have, because I have all these documents, to put together. And all you've got to do is make sense, else in a chronological or flowing way, of the information you're going to be giving to your readers and how you're going to present it to them. I didn't have any mental blocks on what to do in writing this book. My biggest problem was how much information is too much. I would sort of start getting down in the weeds and the weeds and the weeds, and I finally said, wait a minute, this has absolutely nothing to do with a book, although I was greatly interested in it because I'm a history buff, So I had to sort of set aside information I kept on finding and saying, this doesn't need to go in the book, and this does need to go in the book. So something I would like to mention here is that this book is about the ammunition plant and wartime and death and everything else. I never found anything in any records showing that anybody suggested participating in a protest against the plant and what they were doing. Nothing like you would see today. One of my favorite chapters in my book has to do with faith and writing love poems back to their loved ones at the ammunition plant. There was a private who was an engineer in Africa, and he wrote a love poem back to his wife who worked at the ammunition plant. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read it because I want people to understand the emotion that service members have when they're absolutely incommunicado from family members and especially wives. Now, I served in Desert Storm, Saudi Arabia, for 8.5 months. I wrote letters to my wife, but I could also call home. So we didn't have this incommunicado thing type stuff. And back in in World War II, it was totally different, and you never knew when you get mail. Mail sometimes was weeks or months behind the person writing the letter. So, uh, with your permission, I'd like to go ahead and read this poem.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
My book says, quote, "There's something about writing a letter to your spouse when you're in combat. It's deeper than a phone call and more lasting than a vase of flowers. A fighting man had to, at least for the moment, forget the insanity and vastness of war. His mind had to push beside the violent deaths of his buddies. The needs to forget man's and humanity to man had to be just long enough to communicate his deepest, loving, and most personal thoughts to his wife. At the bottom of his soul was a small compartment that reminded him of home. Home offered love, peace, understanding, comfort, and most of all, safety. He wasn't home yet, but in a sense he was when he looked at your picture. When I'm feeling very low and weary and my hopes begin to fall, then I turn and tell my troubles to your picture on the wall. It has listened to the strangest tales a person ever heard, but it never grows sarcastic and it never doubts my word. All the worries and vexations I encounter through the day are unfolded through your picture in a confidential way. I've no doubt at times I'm tiresome, but you wear the same sweet smile. I believe if things grew quiet, you would talk to me a while, for your eyes are always sparkling with the brightest, sweetest glow, and they flash and gleam and dazzle like the sun upon the snow. It's the best of my possessions, the most precious of them all. Why, I'd never take a fortune for your picture on the wall." And that was,
That's great.
I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. That was an actual letter composed by Private Leroy Westergreen with the engineers in Africa and sent to his wife, Dorothy Westergreen, an administrator supervisor at the depot.
That's pretty
Wow.
great.
Yeah.
It- uh, and and I've never been in combat. I've always been in a combat support role. I was a public information officer. I dealt with the media, the community, that type of stuff. But I served 8.5 months in Saudi dealing with the media. And I've always wondered, what do soldiers who are facing combat think of about life after death? Because as a Christian, I think that that issue must come up in every combatant's mind. You can't tell me that there's not an atheist in a fighting hole, because they have to think about is there a life after death. So I address this issue in the book through another real life personal letter. In the March 15th, 1945 Depot newspaper, their reporter found a letter behind a Marine. Left it. In the March 15th, 1945 Depot newspaper, their reporter found a letter left behind by a Marine at a USO center at Hollywood, California, and they published it in the U.S. Navy Depot's newspaper. The thought-provoking missive describes how God shows his presence in life-saving ways during war. The anonymous letter was signed by the Philadelphians, and it goes like this, quote, "There's a God, all right. We met him at the canal, Tarawa, and Bougainville. He was that extra round of ammunition when the other guy ran out. He was that log we huddled behind when we hit the beach and were too scared to move. He was that courage that lasted when in all humanness we should have been yellow. He was what turned kids into men and fear into faith. He knew war was too big for us to handle alone, so he was with us. Yes, there's a God, and I pity the man who continues life without him." And then there's one other real life poem here written by another military person who seemed to only have found God when it was nearly too late. And as the story goes, quote, "The original poem was found in the pockets of the soldier who was killed in battle." And it reads, quote, "Look, God, I have never spoken to you. Now I want to say, how do you do? You see, God, they told me you didn't exist, and like a fool, I believed all of this. Last night from a shell hole I saw your sky. I figured right then they had told me a lie. Had I taken time to see the things you made, I know they weren't calling a spade a spade. I wonder, God, if you shake my hand. Sometimes I feel that you will understand. Funny, I had to come to this hellish place before I had the time to see your face. Well, I guess there isn't much more to say, but I'm sure glad, God, I met you today. I guess the 0 hours will soon be here, but I'm not afraid since I know you're near. The signal Well, God, I'll have to go. I like you a lot. This much I know. Look now, this will be a horrible fight. Who knows? I may come to your house tonight. Though I wasn't friendly with you before, I wonder, God, if you'd wait at your door. Look, I'm crying. No, shedding tears. I wish I'd known you these many years. Well, I have to go now, God. Goodbye. Strange, since I met you, I'm not afraid to die.
Wow.
This poem was very, very personally intense to me, so.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I mean, I think we're actually a little bit over time, but those were worth it. And I think I don't want to add a whole lot to that, honestly, other than say we're waiting on the DoD review. That's
Right.
the last piece, and then we make the part that goes boom will be available everywhere books are sold. And we're getting ready to start working on an audiobook too. So there's a bunch of stuff coming out. We'll keep everybody updated. We'll send an email out when it's available. But this is, I mean, I don't know about Brian. This has been one of my favorite podcasts we've done. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we both know that it was going to be a fun one. So thank you very much, Mark. It's been great to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks a bunch. And Page Break Podcast is out for today, but we'll see you next time.